Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Okay, so, Red Scare, McCarthyism. More to it than just a textbook villain.
Yeah.
Let's dive in. We're looking at a podcast lecture, some other stuff you sent, trying to unpack, was Senator McCarthy really onto something, or was this just, like, national panic mode? To really get this, we got to rewind a bit. Right, back to the early Cold War. It wasn't just, oh, the Soviet Union, they're a rival. This was a whole different beast.
Oh, yeah. Ideologically driven, aiming for, global domination. Communism wasn't just another political system to a lot of Americans back then. It was like
Existential threat, right.
totally. Like, imagine being that average American family in the 1950s. They've just come out of World War II. There's this threat of nuclear war hanging over everyone's heads. And now you've got this idea of communists infiltrating the government, schools, your neighborhood even. Terrifying.
Like something out of a spy movie, but it's their life.
Exactly. And that's where McCarthy pops up. Big time.
Not a subtle entrance.
No. 1950, February, he gives this speech, infamous now, claims he's got a list, over 200 communists working right inside the State Department. That wasn't just an allegation. It was going right for the core of American diplomacy.
And that's where maybe his ambition, maybe paranoia, I don't know, takes center stage. The podcast we're looking at called him a master showman, more about the headlines than actual truth.
Yeah, there's truth to that. McCarthy knew how to play on fear. Hearings, big accusations, but proof, evidence, not so much.
So it's guilt by association, insinuation, that whole game.
Exactly. Anyone could get slapped with that communist sympathizer label, didn't matter what they actually believed.
Like weaponizing public opinion. Forget legal stuff. You put people on trial in the papers, on the radio.
Hence that witch hunt comparison. Careers gone, lives wrecked, all built on, flimsy accusations and fear. But, and this is where it gets interesting, he wasn't entirely wrong.
That's where those decoded Soviet messages, Venona transcripts come in.
Exactly. Years later, those get declassified, and boom, Soviet espionage in the U.S. Not just talk. For example, there's this one message, details about nuclear secrets being passed to the Soviets. It helped them develop their own atomic bomb way sooner than anyone expected. Some of that fear about communist infiltration, it was real.
So there were legitimate worries, but then you've got McCarthy's, over-the-top tactics, individual rights, out the window.
Yeah, hard to separate the real threat from the political frenzy.
Makes this era tough to unpack.
It'd be easy to condemn McCarthy outright now, but you have to remember, huge anxiety back then. The Cold War, it was like a global chess match, but with everything on the line. Economics, ideas, the works.
So how did the American left, the ones McCarthy was mainly going after, how did they respond? The podcast mentioned it wasn't exactly a united front.
Well, right. The American left wasn't one big thing. Labor unions, thinkers, artists, activists, all different goals, different ideas. Some, they were into communist ideals, especially back in the 1930s, Depression era, when communism seemed like,
A real alternative.
Right. To capitalism.
But wouldn't that make them even bigger targets for McCarthy?
Totally. If you even looked like you were into leftist stuff, never mind actually working with the Soviet Union, you were done.
Yeah.
Blacklisted, fired, the works. So even people on the left who hated Stalin, hated Soviet communism, they shut up. Didn't want to get caught in the crossfire.
So, you disagree with this guy, you see what he's doing, but you can't say anything. You're afraid of being called a communist, too.
Fear, man. It's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
More powerful than any, And the effects, it wasn't just the people McCarthy went after directly. Think about Hollywood. You're a screenwriter, an actor, whatever, and now your whole career depends on whether someone thinks you're a communist.
It wasn't just a hypothetical, right? Weren't there actual blacklists, people banned from working?
Oh, totally. The Hollywood blacklist, that's the big one. HUAC, this House Un-American Activities Committee, they'd haul people in, pressure them to name names, tell us who the communists are in Hollywood. And if you didn't play along, blacklisted. Career over.
Man, the stories that never got told, the creativity stifled because everyone was terrified.
And it wasn't just Hollywood either. Universities, labor unions, scientists even. Professors losing their jobs over their beliefs. Union leaders ousted. The pursuit of knowledge, art, even basic worker rights, all caught in the crosshairs.
It's like McCarthy's whole thing, it left a stain, Not just on the people he attacked, but on the whole country. Did anyone push back? Or was it just too dangerous?
There were people. Even when McCarthy was at his peak, Edward R. Murrow, the journalist, he went after McCarthy's tactics, questioned his evidence, but it was tough. Those voices were drowned out by all the fear, all the accusations flying around.
It takes guts, though. To speak up when could cost you everything. Makes you wonder how many other people felt the same way, but just stayed quiet?
That's the question, isn't it? Historians are still trying to figure that out, how much self-censorship is going on. But I mean, it's obvious. People felt the pressure to fit in, keep their mouths shut, even if it meant betraying what they believed.
Dark times, man. But we gotta remember, McCarthy didn't invent this fear of communism out of thin air, right? He tapped into something that was already there.
You got it. He exploited it. The Red Scare, it came from somewhere. The Soviet Union getting powerful, nuclear weapons, China going communist. People were scared, man. They thought their whole way of life was under attack.
So yeah, his tactics were extreme, but to a lot of people, it probably made sense. They were already looking for communists everywhere.
Exactly. That's what makes this whole period so fascinating and so relevant even now. How easily we can be manipulated, how powerful fear and propaganda can be.
It's like a warning, about what happens when we let fear win, when we sacrifice our principles for the sake of security.
Yeah.
It's like we haven't fully moved on, the echoes are still here. How we talk about national security, free speech, even just the way we label people who disagree with us politically. It's like McCarthyism's ghost.
Right. The past doesn't just disappear. McCarthy, his way of doing things, it blew up in his face eventually. Too many lies, I guess. But we're still dealing with the fallout.
Yeah, like every time there's some big threat, real or imagined, terrorism, a pandemic, even different political views, suddenly it's like, how far do we go? How do we keep things safe, but not,
Throw out our freedoms in the process. That's the tightrope. And that's why this era matters. It's not just, oh, McCarthy bad, end of story. It's what made that possible in the first place. The fear, the politicians taking advantage, people deciding it's okay to, I don't know.
Sacrifice other people's rights to feel safer.
Exactly. And if we don't learn from that, well, you know the saying, history repeats. But it's also important to remember there were people fighting back then too, risking everything to stand up to McCarthy to defend basic freedoms.
And those people, a lot of them, they got blacklisted, ostracized, just for doing the right thing.
Exactly. It shows we always have a choice, even when it seems impossible, even when you're scared. Do you stay quiet or do you speak up for what you believe in? So after all this, after this whole deep dive,
what's the takeaway? What should people keep in mind?
think for yourself. Question what you hear, especially when it's coming from a place of fear or anger. McCarthyism, it wasn't just him. It was a whole bunch of people, whole country, ready to believe the easiest, most convenient story.
And willing to pay a pretty steep price for that simplicity.
Yeah, and it reminds us that fight for freedom, it never really ends, does it? We got to stay vigilant, think critically, and be willing to speak up, even when it's hard. Because if we don't, someone else will fill that silence. And it might not be with something we want to hear.
Man, that's heavy. But important.
Yeah.
So if this got you thinking, do some more digging on your own. Look into the people who lived through this, the stories they tell, and think about how the things we talked about, how they're still playing out today. It's a conversation worth having, that's for sure.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.